"You took my yump," the foxwoman said, voice trembling. He turned from the firelight and saw her starving eyes glowing gold in the dark. If you enjoy heartwarming HFY stories filled with compassion, connection, and a touch of laughter, don't forget to subscribe. Snow whispered against the roof of the cabin, soft as fur brushing wood. Inside, the fire cracked lazily, painting the walls gold and amber. The man who lived there, Rowan Vale, was the kind of human who preferred the company of trees over people. Out here on the edge of civilization, no one knocked on his door. No neighbors, no strangers, just quiet. He built the place with his own hands, beams carved from local timber, walls insulated with scavenged synth fiber, tools hung neatly in rows that no one else would ever touch. He liked it that way. No fuss, no noise, no surprises. Until, of course, he found himself trying to feed 4 tiny fox-like creatures with a bottle meant for coffee creamer. They made little squeaking sounds, pawing at him with clumsy legs. One bit his thumb, another sneezed milk onto his shirt. Rowan sighed. "Congratulations, Vale," he muttered. "You've officially hit rock-bottom parenthood by accident." He glanced toward the window. Beyond the glass, the forest loomed. Endless pines dusted in frost. Shadows deep enough to swallow sound. Somewhere out there, he hoped, a mother fox was looking for her litter. But as the hours dragged on and the snow thickened, he started to realize something grim. Maybe she wasn't coming back. Rowan shifted closer to the fire, pulling the small creatures into an old blanket. "All right," he murmured, half to them, half to himself. "You can stay the night, but no promises about breakfast." The kids chirped and riddled closer, falling asleep against his chest. Outside, just beyond the flicker of the window's light, 2 golden eyes watched quietly from the trees. The first snow of the season had fallen thicker than usual that morning, muffling the entire forest into silence. Rowan Vale trudged through it with his old plasma rifle slung across his shoulder and a satchel of traps at his hip. His breath fogged in front of him as he muttered to no one. Should have restocked beans instead of bullets. He wasn't a hunter by trade, just a man trying to keep himself fed and sane out on the edges of nowhere. The nearest settlement was a 4-hour ride by snow sled, and Rowan liked it that way. The people there were friendly enough, sure, but they talked too much. Asked too many questions about why a man would live alone in the woods on a terraformed planet most folks had forgotten existed. His usual hunt route wound through the pines toward the valley. But today, something felt off. The forest was too still. No birds, no rustle, not even the soft hum of nocturnal critters under the brush. When he finally spotted movement near a frozen creek bed, it wasn't what he expected. A small hollow beneath a dead log. A faint whimpering sound. Rowan crouched and pulled his gloves off. Inside were 4 tiny creatures, fox-like, with reddish-gold fur and tails that shimmered faintly when they moved. Alien genetics, maybe, but unmistakably mammals. Their ribs showed under their fur, bellies sunken. They blinked up at him, eyes glassy and scared. "Ah, hell," Rowan murmured. "You're not dinner?" He looked around. No tracks leading in or out. No sign of an adult. He checked the ridge, the nearby den holes, nothing. The little ones mewled again, one pawing weakly at his boot. He sighed. "I'm not qualified for this." He knelt beside them, tugged a ration bar from his pack, and broke it into crumbs small enough for them to lick. They tried, but their strength was fading fast. Rowan rubbed his jaw, glancing at the sky. The light was dimming, blue fading to violet behind the trees. "All right," he muttered finally, scooping one up. It squeaked, tiny claws catching on his sleeve. "I'll wait, but just till sundown. If your mom doesn't show, you're coming with me." He built a small fire nearby and sat beside it, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the terrain. The woods were quiet, except for the occasional crack of ice shifting in the creek. The foxlings huddled near his boots, drawn to the warmth. He tossed another twig into the flame. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "You've got kids waiting." An hour passed, then another. The cold deepened and the kits grew still. Rowan stood, stretching his stiff legs. His gut twisted. He knew what leaving them meant. The snow would bury this spot by morning. "Damn it," he said softly. He scooped the whole litter into his coat, careful not to crush them, and started back toward the cabin. The walk took nearly an hour. By the time he reached home, his hands were numb, and the babies were asleep in the folds of his jacket, tiny breaths fogging his chest plate. Inside, the cabin greeted him with its usual creaks and warmth. The fireplace glowed dimly, and his old kettle still sat on the stove. He laid the foxlings in a box lined with a wool shirt, then rummaged through his supplies until he found a bottle he used for oil storage. After a vigorous cleaning and muttered prayer, he filled it with a watered-down mix of powdered milk substitute. The first attempt at feeding them was pure chaos. One immediately latched onto his thumb instead of the bottle. Another sneezed the formula across his sleeve. A third crawled directly into the bowl. Rowan stared down at the sticky mess side and said, "I was happier when dinner didn't bite back." Eventually they ate. Tiny paws clung to his fingers as they drank, tails twitching weakly. When they finished, all 4 curled up against his shirt. Rowan eased himself into the armchair by the fire. Kits piled in his lap like warm socks and stared into the flames. He should have felt annoyed, another burden, another complication. But instead, he just felt quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't sting. "Guess you're stuck with me," he said softly. The next morning, chaos began in earnest. One kid discovered how to climb onto the table and promptly fell into his breakfast pan. Another decided his sock drawer was a great hiding place for stolen kindling. Rowan grumbled constantly, but didn't mean a word of it. He built them a pen beside the fireplace and stuffed it with blankets. They slept in a pile, little tails twitching, making small, trilling noises that reminded him of rain tapping glass. That evening, while chopping wood, Rowan caught movement from the corner of his eye, something tall slipping between the trees. For a split second, he thought he saw the gleam of gold eyes. He froze, axe halfway through a log. But when he turned fully, there was nothing there, just trees and snow. "Huh?" he muttered. Starting to see things again, he shook it off and went inside. The foxlings were tangled together in their nests, one snoring loudly enough to make him grin. He set another log on the fire, stretched and leaned back. "All right, freeloaders," he said, looking at the sleeping pile. "Tomorrow, I'm teaching you rent." Their only response was a sleepy squeak. Outside, unseen beyond the frost-lined window, a shape lingered at the edge of the tree line, watching, waiting. The wind stirred her hair, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark as she whispered a single word too soft for the human to hear. "Mine." Rowan woke to something biting his ear. He blinked groggily, and a blur of fur and tails filled his vision. One of the foxlings had climbed onto his pillow. Another was halfway down his shirt collar, and a third was making war cries at his blanket. The fourth he didn't see at all until his foot brushed something warm at the edge of the bed. He sat up. The missing culprit was curled at the foot of the mattress, chewing on his bootlace with unholy determination. "Yep," Rowan grumbled. Parenthood. He spent the next hour rescuing his breakfast from tiny jaws, refilling bowls with warm formula, and trying unsuccessfully to establish what he called the concept of boundaries. They didn't care. By mid-morning, the cabin looked like a tornado made of fur had hit it. One managed to knock over his toolkit, sending wrenches clattering across the floor. Another learned how to open the latch on the flour bin and wore a proud dusting of white like war paint. Rowan stared at the chaos, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You guys are either going to grow up brilliant or start a cult." He swept up the mess, grumbling the whole time. Still, there was a half-smile tugging at his mouth. The cabin had been too quiet for too long. Now every creak and squeak felt alive again. By afternoon, he'd taken to talking to them like unruly roommates. "No, that's my lunch." "Yes, that's fire. Don't touch it." "Hey, if you chew another cable, I'm sending you to trade school." One of them chirped, as if arguing back. Rowan pointed his spatula at it. "Don't sass me." He cooked while they played, the smell of spiced stew mixing with the warm musk of fur and wood smoke. When he sat down to eat, all four of them lined up in a perfect row, staring at him with imploring eyes. He sighed. "You're learning emotional manipulation?" "Great." He tossed each a small cube of cooked root. They devoured it instantly, tails wagging like tiny metronomes. Rowan leaned back, arms crossed, pretending not to enjoy it. "You're all menaces," he muttered, half smiling. Later, as dusk fell, he took his coat and stepped outside to split more wood. The air bit colder now, snow whispering down between the trees. He liked the rhythm of it, the swing, the crack, the clean split. Work he could control, but something kept distracting him. A glint, faint and golden, deep between the pines. He froze, axe still raised. His first thought was animal eyes catching the light, but they didn't blink like a normal creature's. They were steady watching. Rowan set the axe down slowly. "All right," he muttered, scanning the dark. "If you're a scavenger, you're not going to find much. If you're a serial killer, you picked the wrong neighborhood." Nothing moved, just the hiss of falling snow. After a minute, he shook his head and went back inside. But the hair on his arms stayed prickled long after the door shut behind him. Inside, the foxlings had rearranged their bedding into what appeared to be a complex fortress made of socks. One looked up at him with a blank innocence of the utterly guilty. "Right," he said. "You definitely didn't do that unsupervised." He crouched down and fixed the blankets, his expression softening as one yawned wide enough to squeak. "Okay," he murmured. "I'll give you this. You're cute enough to get away with it." He sat by the fire a while, book in hand. The kids snuggled into their pen, but he couldn't quite shake that feeling, the sense that something intelligent had been out there just beyond the tree line. A few times that night, he thought he heard the crunch of snow underfoot outside. When he checked the window, though, the forest was still. Rowan frowned and muttered, "If it's a ghost, fine. Just don't expect dinner." The smallest kit squeaked in its sleep, tail twitching. Rowan smiled faintly, pushed his chair back, and added another log to the fire. The flame flared brighter, warm light spilling across the room. Outside, the forest shifted. At the edge of the clearing, hidden by the snow-laden branches, a tall shape crouched low. Amber eyes reflected the cabin's glow. Sad, cautious, hungry, and watching her young sleep through the glass, the vulpine mother whispered softly in her tongue, "Safe! They are safe!" The days settled into a strange, comfortable rhythm. Rowan woke to the sound of foxling mischief, spent the morning fixing whatever they'd broken, and the evenings cooking while they snored by the fire. For the first time in years, the silence of his cabin wasn't heavy. It was alive, filled with chirps, trills, and the occasional crash that made him question his life choices. He'd grown to recognize their personalities. The smallest one, who he nicknamed Nibbles, was a fearless explorer and frequent troublemaker. The second Pip had a habit of staring at the kettle until it whistled, then bolting under the table as if the noise personally offended him. The other two were inseparable. He never named them properly, calling them simply the twins, even though he wasn't sure they were related. Rowan was proud of himself for keeping them all alive. It was a low bar, but it was progress. Still, he couldn't ignore that feeling anymore. The watching. It started subtly. Tracks in the snow too large for the kits. Food he'd left outside mysteriously disturbed. The faint shimmer of light between the trees at night. The logical part of him said it was a wild predator. The more honest part admitted it felt like something else. Someone else. He even tried talking to it. "All right, stalker," he said one night, standing on his porch with a mug of bitter coffee. "If you're going to watch me, at least bring marshmallows. It's weird otherwise." The forest unsurprisingly did not respond. He exhaled, breath fogging in the cold. He should have been nervous, but oddly enough, he wasn't. Something about the unseen watcher didn't feel dangerous, just sad, like a presence, afraid to step closer. That night, as he closed the shutters, he caught a glimpse of golden light again. Two eyes low to the snow, watching the glow from his window. But when he turned the lantern toward them, they vanished. Paranoid, he muttered. "You're officially talking to glowing dots now. Congratulations, Rowan." He went inside, shut the door, and double-checked the locks partially for security, mostly for his pride. The next morning, he found a fresh rabbit carcass near the woodpile. Cleanly killed, not mauled. No blood trail, just left there. Rowan stared at it for a long time, then at the tree line. "Okay," he said slowly. "Either I've got a generous forest spirit, or one of you learned to hunt overnight." He looked back at the kits, 3 chewing on a pillow, the 4th asleep in his boot. Yeah, no, definitely the forest spirit. He carried the rabbit inside and skinned it carefully. Later, when he stepped out to toss the scraps, he caught himself saying, "Thanks, whoever you are." From somewhere far off in the snow, a branch creaked softly, almost like a reply. Over the next few days, the offerings continued. Fresh herbs, a chunk of smoked meat, once even a carved bit of bone shaped like a leaf. Rowan stopped pretending it was coincidence. The foxlings grew stronger, fatter, more playful. Sometimes they'd run to the window and stare out into the trees, tails flicking in unison. He swore they recognized something out there, someone. One night, the wind hauled hard enough to shake the cabin. Rowan sat awake by the fire, rifle across his knees, pretending not to be uneasy. Then there, movement in the dark, he saw the glow again, closer than ever, just beyond the clearing. A tall, lean silhouette moved with deliberate grace between the trunks, only a faint flash of orange-red. Not an animal, not quite human either. Rowan's pulse quickened. He stood slowly, careful not to wake the sleeping kits, and moved to the window. The figure froze for a heartbeat. They simply stared at each other, one man framed by firelight and a pair of luminous eyes reflecting it back. Then she was gone, a blur melting into the snow, silent as smoke. Rowan pressed a hand to the cold glass. His reflection looked back at him, weary and curious. "You're their mother?" he whispered. "Aren't you?" He stayed there for a long moment before finally turning away. The kids had stirred in their sleep, whimpering softly. He knelt by their pen, brushing one with his finger. "It's all right," he murmured. "She's close." The words slipped out before he realized what he'd said. When he finally went to bed, the forest had gone silent again. But just before sleep took him, he thought he heard a voice carried on the wind, a faint, melodic whisper that could have been the creak of branches. Rowan's eyes opened briefly. He almost smiled. "Guess I'm not crazy after all," he murmured. Outside unseen, the vulpine mother crouched low in the snow, the firelight glinting in her tear-bright eyes. The wind howled outside the cabin that night, carrying the weight of deep winter with it. Snow drifted in slow spirals past the windows, soft and relentless, blanketing the forest in white. Inside, the fire crackled steadily, its glow painting warm gold across the floorboards and a pile of sleeping foxings near the hearth. Rowan sat nearby, half dozing in his chair, book forgotten on his lap. He'd grown used to the silence between the crackles of the fire, the kind of peace that only comes when the world outside is frozen solid. But tonight felt different. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up before he heard it. A faint shift of snow outside, too careful to be the wind. He lifted his head, listening, then the soft creak of the porch boards. Someone was there. He reached for his rifle, but hesitated. The sound wasn't heavy, not the stride of a predator or a scavenger. It was light, almost cautious. The latch turned. The door creaked open. For a heartbeat, colder rushed in, scattering embers from the hearth. Then she stepped through. The figure in the doorway was tall and slender, wrapped in ragged pelts. Snow clung to her fur. Real fur, russet, fading into white along her tail and ears. Her hair fell in tangled waves around her face, and her golden eyes gleamed in the firelight. She looked wild, starved, exhausted, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Rowan didn't move. The rifle stayed untouched at his side. He didn't need to ask who she was. "You're their mother," he said quietly. Her breath stopped in her throat. She nodded once slowly, as if the strength to speak had left her. Her gaze shifted past him to the nest near the fire. The foxlings were curled together, tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath, safe and warm in the glow. Her expression softened, eyes shimmering. For a long time she didn't say a word. Rowan followed her gaze, his voice low, calm. "I found them near the creek. They were cold, hungry. I waited. Thought maybe someone would come back, but it got dark and I didn't think they'd last the night." The woman swallowed hard, her throat moving as if forcing words she hadn't used in a while. When she finally spoke, her accent was thick, her voice rough from disuse, but clear. "The snow was too heavy that night. I hunted far, lost the scent." She paused, eyes flicking briefly toward him. "When I returned, they were gone." I thought, her voice faltered, a tremor breaking through. "I thought I lost them." Rowan said nothing for a moment. The only sound between them was the steady crackle of the fire and the faint whimper of one of the kits shifting in its sleep. "Until you followed their scent here," he said quietly. She nodded again. The flicker of the flames reflected in her eyes, turning them into twin embers. "You've been watching." It wasn't a question, but she still hesitated before answering. Her tail twitched once behind her, then stilled. "Yes." He didn't sound angry when he asked the next question, just tired and a little sad. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her hands, clawed and trembling, clutched at the ragged pelt around her shoulders. For a moment, she looked like she might flee right back into the snow. Then the dam broke. "They're safer with you." The words came out quiet, brittle, and final. Her voice cracked on the last syllable. Rowan's chest tightened. He looked at her properly now, the hollow cheeks, the dull sheen of her fur, the faint tremor of someone who hadn't eaten in days. She wasn't a predator. She was a mother who'd run herself half to death trying to survive. Her eyes filled, the reflection of the fire turning her tears to molten gold. "I washed," she whispered. "You feed them. You keep them warm." "I could not." Rowan didn't move closer, didn't speak yet. He just sat there, hard heavy, the weight of her pain pressing through the quiet. Outside, the storm deepened, snow whispering against the glass. Inside, the foxlings stirred and nestled closer together. He looked from them to her, this trembling creature of warmth and ruin standing in his doorway, and felt something deep in his chest twist in a way he hadn't in years. The words came out rough, softer than the fire's crackle. "You shouldn't have to choose between their safety and being with them." She didn't answer, only bowed her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. And, as the firelight wrapped the cabin in soft orange glow, Rowan Vale, alone no longer, sat in silence with the woman who had haunted his nights, the mother, whose heart had broken long before she ever stepped through his door. The kids slept on unaware. The fire burned low, and for the first time since winter began, Rowan felt the cabin breathe. For a long time, after her tears fell silent, either of them moved. The fire hissed and shifted, a log collapsing into glowing embers. The air between them was fragile, stretched thin by the weight of everything unsaid. Rowan finally rose from his chair, slow and deliberate, careful not to startle her. He crossed the cabin, opened a small cabinet, and took out a tin of dried stew mix. When he looked back, she was watching him wearily, one hand resting on the doorframe as though she might still bolt. "You look half-starved," he said softly. "Sit. You're not scaring anyone." Her ears twitched, unsure if it was a command or kindness. He gestured toward the hearth. "Go on. It's warmer there." After a long pause, she stepped inside, cautious steps, soundless on the wood. The heat hit her, and she flinched as if the warmth itself were strange. Rowan turned back to his pot, muttering under his breath. "Should have made extra," he worked quietly, mixing the stew with water, letting it simmer over the flame. The scent filled the room. Herbs, smoked meat, and something faintly sweet. When he finally handed her a steaming bowl, she stared at it suspiciously before taking it in both hands. "It's food," he said with a faint smirk. "Not poison, promise?" Her golden eyes flicked up, uncertain. Then she took a tentative sip. The moment the warmth hit her tongue, her shoulders loosened a fraction. She drank faster, then stopped abruptly, as if embarrassed by her own hunger. Rowan turned away to give her the illusion of privacy, pretending to focus on the fire. "You can eat more if you want. I've got plenty." "Humans," she murmured, her voice quiet, but carrying a lilting cadence. "Always offering, even when they have little." He shrugged, poking at the embers. "I've got enough. Besides, you've been out there for days. Anyone would have done the same." Her eyes softened, disbelieving. "Not everyone." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound her spoon clinking gently against the metal bowl. When she finished, she set it down carefully beside her as though afraid to take up too much space. "What should I call you?" Rowan asked after a while. She hesitated, then said, "Sarah." The name rolled like warm smoke, soft and ancient. "My people call me Sarah." Then he nodded. "Rowan Vale." Her ears twitched again. "Rowan," she said. At it carefully, testing the shape of it. "It sounds like tree." "Yeah," he said with a faint grin. "My mother thought it would make me grow straight and tall." Jury's still out. Sarah's lips twitched. Just a hint of amusement, but then faded back into quiet. Her gaze lingered on the sleeping kids near the fire. They look strong. They are, Rowan said gently. You should be proud. They're survivors. Her eyes glistened again. I did not think they would live. You kept them alive long enough for me to find them, he said. That's something. The room went still. She shifted closer to the fire, tail curling tight around her legs. Rowan noticed the tremor in her hands, the way her fur bristled at every gust of wind that rattled the cabin walls. He rose and fetched one of his blankets, rough but clean, and draped it carefully over her shoulders. She stiffened, surprised. Why? Why would you? You're freezing, he said simply. That's reason enough. Her ears lowered, a sound halfway between a hum and a sigh slipping from her throat. You're a strange human. He chuckled quietly, settling back in his chair. Oh, you're not the first to say that. For the first time, she smiled, a small flickering thing that barely reached her eyes but made something warm twist in his chest. The tension in the room softened, replaced by the quiet peace of shared exhaustion. When the fire began to fade, she curled up near the hearth, still wrapped in the blanket. Her tail tucked close, her breathing uneven, half leap, half wary instinct. Even in rest, she looked ready to flee. Rowan sat for a while longer, watching the flames shrink to coals. Then he said softly, You're safe here, Sarah. She didn't answer. But after a moment, the restless movement of her tail slowed and her breathing evened out. By morning, the world outside was quiet again, blue light spilling through frosted glass. Rowan woke to the smell of cold air and the faintest sound of movement near the fire. Sarah was still there, kneeling by the hearth. The kids had woken and gathered around her, uncertain at first, then squeaking in recognition. The moment they realized who she was, all four barreled toward her in a flurry of fur and noise. Sarah gasped softly, scooping them into her arms as they climbed and nuzzled against her. Her laughter came out choked, almost disbelieving, as she buried her face in their fur. My little ones. Rowan leaned against the doorway, smiling quietly. It wasn't the kind of grin you give for show, just a soft, genuine curve of relief. Sarah looked up at him through tears, eyes shimmering gold in the morning light. Thank you, she whispered. He shook his head. Don't thank me. You did the hard part. The cabin felt warmer than it had all winter. The fire crackled back to life. Outside, snow still fell, but inside, for the first time, there was laughter. It turned out that inviting a fox woman and 4 hungry kids to share a one-room cabin was an experience. Rowan wasn't sure what he expected, but mild chaos was putting it politely. Still, the days that followed had a rhythm, an odd, mismatched one, but a rhythm nonetheless. Sarah was cautious at first. She moved like a shadow, quiet and uncertain, as though afraid she'd vanish if she took up too much space. The first morning, she sat near the window while the kids played, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Rowan offered her a mug of broth, she hesitated before taking it, her voice barely audible. I take your food, your fire. I take your home. He shrugged. You're not taking it. You're using it. Big difference. Sarah frowned at that, ears flicking. Still, I should repay somehow. Rowan looked at her for a moment, then went back to chopping vegetables for breakfast. You don't owe me anything. She seemed to mull that over for a long time, tail flicking idly. Later that day, she tried helping anyway, cleaning dishes awkwardly with claws, fetching water from the frozen creek, stacking wood hazardly beside the stove. Every time something clattered or spilled, she'd flinch like she expected him to snap. He never did. Hey, he said once when she accidentally dropped a whole pot of snowmelt. You're supposed to make a mess. That's part of living here. Her eyes darted to his, startled. You are not angry. Angry? He chuckled. No, I did worse my first month alone here. You should have seen my attempt at laundry. That earned the smallest smile from her. Quick, fleeting, but real. By the 3rd day, she was moving with a little more confidence. The kids followed her everywhere, tumbling underfoot while Rowan repaired the fence outside. When he handed her the hatchet, her expression froze. You trust me with this? She asked carefully. If I didn't, I'd be an idiot, he said. You know what you're doing. He expected her to protest. Instead, she took the tool and studied the nearest log, ears twitching with focus. The first swing split clean through. Rowan blinked. Better than me. Sarah's lips quirked upward in the faintest ghost of pride. My people, we built with our claws before tools. What remembers strength? Then I'll make sure it remembers yours, he said lightly, tossing another log toward her. That became their quiet routine. He chopped, she stacked. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Sometimes she asked small, hesitant questions about human customs. Once, when she caught him staring into the woods during a break, she tilted her head and asked softly, Do humans always watch the distance like it might speak to them? He grinned. Only the lonely ones. She blinked, then looked back toward the trees. Then I understand. Each day the color returned to her fur. The dullness in her eyes faded, replaced by a golden spark that matched the kids' mischief. Her laughter, quiet and uncertain at first, began to escape more freely, especially when Rowan tripped over one of the foxlings or muttered at the stove. You curse at everything, she said once, amused. It helps, he replied dryly. You should try it sometime. She tilted her head, thoughtful, then carefully repeated one of the milder phrases he'd used earlier. It came out mangled, but with such conviction that Rowan almost dropped the pot he was holding. Good grief, he said, laughing. Now you're picking up bad habits. I learned quickly, she said with mock dignity, tail flicking behind her. As the days turned to a week, the cabin changed. It smelled less like dust and solitude, more like wood smoke, fur, and stew. The walls echoed with small sounds, claws clicking on the floor, laughter, the crack of logs splitting outside. One evening, as they finished their chores, Sarah paused beside the door and looked at him, something solemn behind her eyes. Rowan, she said quietly. I must ask, he turned. Yeah, she lowered her gaze. When I came here, I thought you would hate me for taking your food, your space, for watching you like a thief in the dark. Her tail curled close to her ankles, ears drooping. Tell me how to earn forgiveness. Rowan leaned on his axe, exhaling slowly. Sarah, I told you before, there's nothing to forgive. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Nothing? He shook his head. You were trying to keep your kids alive. I'd have done the same. You don't owe me anything. Sarah's mouth parted as if to argue, but the words never came. Instead, she just looked at him, really looked, and whatever she saw there made her shoulders relax for the first time. That night, she slept easier. By the third morning, she was laughing again, genuinely this time, when one of the kids stole Rowan's glove and darted out into the snow. He chased it with mock outrage while Sarah leaned in the doorway, smiling softly. The weariness that had once weighed her down was gone, replaced by warmth and light. For the first time since she'd arrived, her eyes truly shone gold in the sun. The cabin's rhythm grew steady, an odd duet of human and vulpine habits blending into something quietly domestic. Every morning began with the hiss of the kettle and ended with a fire burning low. Their days marked by the soft chatter of kits, the smell of wood smoke, and Sarah's curiosity about everything she didn't understand. Her latest fascination was coffee. At first, she wrinkled her nose at the bitter smell, watching Rowan pour it into his mug like it was a ritual. But after days of seeing him sip it with a half smile and sigh of satisfaction, she'd finally asked, What does it taste like? He handed her his cup. Go on, try it. Sarah sniffed the drink cautiously, then took the smallest sip. Her ears twitched. Her eyes went wide. This is life, she declared, clutching the mug like a treasure. Rowan barked a laugh. Yeah, that's the idea. I can feel my heart, she said in awe. That's the caffeine, he replied. Try not to drink too much. Too late. By mid-morning, Sarah was buzzing. She darted around the cabin, sweeping, folding, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. The kids followed her in a whirlwind of fur and squeaks while Rowan watched in disbelief, muttering, I've created a monster. When she finally crashed hours later, face first into a pile of blankets, he covered her gently and whispered, Told you so. She didn't hear him. A few days later, while Rowan was finishing his evening chores, he realized he hadn't washed properly and well, longer than he was proud of. With the snow melting a little during the day, his rainwater barrel had finally thawed. He grabbed a towel, muttered something about hygiene, and stepped into the makeshift shower corner. Just a curtain, a bucket, and a prayer. Steam filled the small space as he poured the warmed water over his shoulders. He closed his eyes, letting the heat sink in. It was quiet, peaceful, until the curtain rustled. He froze. Sarah's voice floated through, startled and small. Rowan, the kettle, it whistled strangely. He turned just in time for her to pull the curtain aside. They both went absolutely still. Rowan blinked. She blinked. Then her ears shot up, her face going crimson under the fur. I did not. You are. She stammered incoherently, backing up so fast she nearly tripped over a chair. I did not mean to look. The curtain swayed closed again, leaving Rowan standing there soaked, mortified, and trying not to laugh. Well, he muttered to himself, guess we're past the neighbor's face. Later, when he emerged, dressed, hair damp, pretending like nothing happened, Sarah was at the table with the kids, her back perfectly straight, ears twitching nervously. She avoided eye contact completely. Rowan poured himself coffee and sat across from her like nothing at all had transpired. So, he said casually, you figure out that kettle issue? Sarah blinked, nearly choking on her drink. Why, yes, it whistles less now. Good, he said, smiling faintly. She nodded stiffly, tail flicking once, a faint blush still visible beneath the fur on her cheeks. Neither of them mentioned it again. That evening, Rowan sat by the window, the mug warm in his hands, watching as Sarah played outside with the kids. They darted through the snow, little tails waving behind them as she chased, pounced, and spun circles around them. Her laughter carried across the yard, bright, clear, unguarded. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard her laugh like that. Maybe she couldn't either. She moved with ease now. Her strength returned. Her fur glossy and gold in the fading light. Every trace of exhaustion that once haunted her face was gone. When one of the kids tackled her, she fell back into the snow, laughing helplessly, her tail curling protectively around the pile of tiny bodies. Rowan leaned his head against the window frame, smiling to himself. There was something about the scene, simple, gentle, full of life, that settled deep in his chest, the kind of warmth that didn't come from the fire. He realized he didn't feel alone anymore. When Sarah finally herded the kits back inside, all rosy-checked and smiling, she caught his gaze and paused for just a heartbeat. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. She smiled softly, eyes shining, and the faintest flicker of color returned to her face. Rowan turned back to the fire, heart unexpectedly light. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow, steady, and peaceful. Inside, laughter echoed through the small cabin, and for the first time since he'd built it, the place truly felt like home. Morning sunlight spilled through the frost-glazed window panes, washing the cabin in pale gold. The fire had burned down to embers, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and pine resin. Rowan woke stiff-necked but content, still seated where he'd fallen asleep the night before. Sarah was curled against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her tail draped comfortably over his lap like a silken blanket. For a few heartbeats, he didn't move. The world felt right. The kids snored softly in their nest by the fire. The only sounds were breathing, the crack of settling wood, and the occasional sleepy chirp. When Sarah stirred, blinking groggy, she looked up at him with that quiet, disoriented softness of someone not yet remembering where they were. Then realization flickered through her eyes, followed by the faintest blush under her fur. She pulled her tail back, sitting upright. "You stayed." "Couldn't exactly toss you off," Rowan said with a grin. "You were using me as a pillow." Her ears twitched in mock indignation. "You could have moved." He raised the brow. "Would you have let me?" Sarah opened her mouth, found no answer, and finally just laughed. A warm, genuine laugh that made the room feel brighter. The next few days felt like spring trying to sneak into winter's hold. They spent the mornings working together, splitting logs, patching leaks in the roof, cooking, cleaning, and the afternoons playing referee to 4 increasingly energetic kits. Rowan discovered quickly that Sarah had a mischievous streak. One afternoon, while he was stacking wood, she crept up behind him and flicked her tail against his ear. He spun, startled. "You, that's not fair." Hunter's reflexes dulling, she teased, eyes glittering. He pointed the axe handle at her like a sword. "You're lucky I'm not swinging this thing." She only smirked, tilting her head. "You would not harm me. You are too kind." "Kind?" he scoffed. "You stole my glove yesterday." "I borrowed it," she said, finding innocence. "It smelled like you." "The kids like it," he groaned. "That's not better, Sarah." Her laughter followed him all afternoon. Later, when the chores were done, they went outside with the kids to play in the snow. The sun hung low, its orange light catching in the drifting flakes. Sarah showed the little ones how to burrow tunnels and leap through drifts with surprising grace. Rowan tried to join in once, immediately fell face first into the snow, and came up spluttering while Sarah and the kids howled with laughter. "Oh, sure," he said, brushing ice from his beard. "Laugh it up, you lot. I see how it is." One of the kits pounced on his boot and refused to let go. Sarah stood nearby, tail swinging like a pendulum. "You are outnumbered, human," she said between giggles. "Yeah, watch this." He scooped up a handful of snow and lobbed it gently at her shoulder. The look on her face, pure disbelief, was worth the impending doom. "You did not just throw snow at me," she said in mock outrage. Rowan grinned. "Maybe." Her tail flicked once, then she grinned back. The next thing he knew, a perfect snowball hit him square in the chest. Chaos erupted. The kids joined in, flinging poffles of snow everywhere. For a solid half hour, the clearing became a blur of white and laughter, punctuated by Rowan's curses and Sarah's victorious cheers. By the time they tramped back inside, all of them were soaked, panting, and laughing too hard to care. Sarah wrapped the kits in blankets by the fire while Rowan brewed coffee. When he offered her a mug, she took it with a pleased hum, curling up on the floor beside the little ones. "I understand now," she said between sips, "why humans drink this. It makes the world softer. Or it just keeps us awake enough to enjoy it," he said. She chuckled low and warm. "Perhaps both." The kits eventually drifted to sleep in a tangled heap. Rowan sat nearby, one of the smaller ones resting in his arms. Its fur was unbelievably soft, and it made tiny squeaking noises as it dreamed. Sarah sat close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm, the two of them watching the firelight flicker over the wooden walls. The moment stretched, quiet, content, unspoken. The kid shifted in its sleep, burrowing closer against his chest. Its little mouth opened, mumbling in a drowsy half-dream. "Daddy?" Rowan froze. The word was small, sleepy, innocent, but it hit the air like a spark catching tinder. Sarah's ears twitched sharply, her head turning toward him. The cabin went completely still. The kit snuggled closer, oblivious, breathing soft and even. Rowan looked down at it, his throat suddenly dry, then glanced toward Sarah. Her eyes were wide, unreadable golden fire catching in the dim light. Either of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence that words couldn't touch. The fire had burned low again, embers glowing deep red like the last heartbeat of the night. Outside, snow drifted quietly past the window, soft and endless. Inside, warmth pulled in the small cabin, the kind that didn't come from flame, but from something more fragile and human. The kids were asleep, their tiny bodies piled together beneath the blankets. Rowan sat beside them, one hand still resting lightly on the back of the smallest one. The same who had murmured the word that now hung between them like smoke. "Daddy," he whispered almost to himself. Sarah, seated close beside him, stiffened slightly. Her tail flicked once, her gaze falling to the floor. She opened her mouth, her voice soft, uncertain. Rowan's eyes met hers, the corner of his mouth curving just a little. "Has a ring to it." The words were quiet, unguarded, almost playful, but underneath was something that made her ears tremble. Sarah blinked, caught between relief and confusion. Then slowly she laughed, a soft, trembling sound that wasn't sure if it was joy or fear. Her eyes shimmered in the glow of the dying fire. "You would say that?" He shrugged, half smiling. "Well, it's not the worst thing I've been called." For a while either spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of meaning neither wanted to name yet. Sarah traced idle circles on the wooden floor with her claw, glancing at the sleeping kits. Rowan leaned back against the wall, hands folded loosely in his lap, eyes thoughtful. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. Her voice was low, hesitant, carrying the soft cadence of her native tongue. "Varkin!" Rowan tilted his head. "That one's new." "What's it mean?" She hesitated, the tip of her tail twitching. "It does not have one word in your language. Try me." Her gaze lifted golden and steady, though her voice wavered. "It means protector." A small pause. "And partner?" Rowan blinked, his expression softening. "Protector and partner, huh?" She nodded just once. "In my people's speech, they are the same. To protect someone is to share life with them. It means you belong together." The air in the cabin seemed to still. Even the fire crackled quieter as though it too was listening. Rowan turned toward her, and she met his gaze, hesitant but unafraid this time. Her pupils were wide, reflecting the amber light, her voice a whisper. "It is what I called you in my heart before I dared to speak." For a moment, he could only look at her. This woman who had stepped from the snow, starved and weary, who now sat beside him like she'd always been meant to be there. He smiled softly, not teasing this time, not hiding behind humor. "I like that one, too." Her breath caught. He lifted an arm, slow, deliberate, and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. She tensed for the briefest second, then melted against him, tail brushing softly over his leg. For a heartbeat. They just breathed together. Then a low instinctive vibration rose from her chest again. A purr, soft and steady, muffled against his shirt. She relaxed fully then, her head resting against his chest, her ears twitching as she listened to his heartbeat beneath her. They stayed like that for a long time, the world beyond the cabin forgotten. No more words, no need for them. The silence said enough. The snow kept falling outside. The fire dimmed to coals. In the corner, the kids dreamed softly, safe and content. And on the floor before the hearth, the hunter and the fox mother sat entwined. Two lives that had once been cold and separate, now warmed by the simple, unspoken truth that neither of them needed to run anymore. Her purring grew slower, deeper until it faded into the rhythm of sleep. Rowan looked down at her, peaceful, serene. Her tail still curled gently around his arm and smiled faintly. He didn't move. He didn't want to. Outside, dawn was beginning to rise, painting the snow in soft gold. Inside, for the first time since either of them could remember, warmth and belonging filled the air completely. And though no one spoke it aloud, both of them knew. They had stopped being strangers the moment she stepped out of the cold. If that story warmed your heart, make sure you're subscribed for more human alien tales of kindness and found family. Let me know if you enjoyed this story with kids. I know it's been requested often. Leave a like, share it with someone who needs a smile tonight, and join us next time for another story beneath the stars.